Okay, so I'm homesick, and then I was gonna have Quinn present my slides, but then I decided he's not good enough for my slides because these slides are beautiful. So I'm just gonna make a video and totally rip off Ben's idea. Thanks, Ben. So there's this guy named Harsha, right? And after the Guptas collapsed, the idea of centralized imperial rule doesn't completely like disappear, and like Harsha's like, I'm gonna do the centralized imperial rule thing. So he temporarily restores unified rule in most of northern India, and he wanted to revive imperial authority. He came to the throne at age 16, and then he led this army throughout northern India, and he had like 20,000 like cavalry, 50,000 infantry, and 5,000 war elephants. Like I'm low key jealous because that's a lot of war elephants, and I don't even have one. Like not even one. Okay, so by 612, he subdued his opposition. He extended his influence to several Himalayan states and exchanged embassies with Tang Taizong of China. And he had a reputation for being generally a good person. And he was a Buddhist, but he was like, it's all right if you guys practice different religions. And he had hospitals and free medical care for his subjects because he's better than us. And he liberally distributed wealth to his subjects. And then he, like, even though he had a favorable reputation, he couldn't do anything permanent because after the Guptas fell, the local rulers really established their authority like so deeply that he couldn't overcome it. And so he spent a lot of time trying to like solidify alliances with local rulers. And then so he basically held this loose empire together with like duct tape and goodwill and cookies or something. And then he gets assassinated and he doesn't have an heir, so everything just kind of disappears. And then North India goes back to doing their whole fighty thing. And yeah. Okay, there's this place called Sindh, and Sindh was like the Indus River Valley in like northwestern India. Okay, so like in the beginning of well the history of that area, they were kind of just like people were going in there to like explore, but they weren't really there to take over anything until 7-Eleven, when they're basically just like we're gonna just take over everything. So they do, and that becomes part of the Umayyad Empire. And then around like 750, they just handed over to the Abbasid caliphs. And even though it was under the Abbasid caliphs, they were really just beyond the effective authority. So, like, technically it was under their control, but like in practice they weren't under their control at all. So most of the population stays Buddhist or Hindu or Parsi, and then there's some unorthodox Islamic movements, and there's fighting in between Arab administrators, which allows people to reassert Hindu authority in Sindh, and then it stays under Caliph jurisdiction until the Abbasid collapse in 1258. And then there's merchants in Islam, so like there's merchants traveling through ports, and they form like small communities in all the big cities in coastal India, and they're able to integrate into Indian society. And integrating through forming small communities in port cities is a lot more subtle than just straight up taking over an entire part of India. So I don't know why the book said it that way, but that's there. So the Gujarat region housed the largest Muslim population because of the port city of Cambay, and Cambay was the most important trade city in India for like 1,000 years. And then there's also Turkish migrants, and they kind of spread Islam by migrating and also invading, and that helped a little bit with the introduction of Islam. And then there was like Mahmud of Ghazni, and he was the leader of the Turks in Afghanistan, and he raided India like a bunch of times. And he took advantage of like people fighting in between each other to take over. He's not really after taking over stuff. He's just after the money because money makes the world go round. And he also did this thing where he like destroyed a lot of Hindu and Buddhist sites. So Buddhism, like the decline of Buddhism, is helped a little bit by that. And then he set up Islamic shrines or mosques in these spots. And then for some reason Indians were less inclined to convert to Islam. Okay, and then there's like the Sultanate of Delhi. So the successors of Mahmud conquered most of the Hindu kingdoms in northern India, and they established an Islamic state called the Sultanate of Delhi, and the capital was at Delhi. What a surprise, right? Okay, so they controlled access from the Punjab to the Ganges Valley, and they ruled in northern India for roughly 300 years, and it was one of the most powerful Islamic states in the world. But their power didn't really go much farther past Delhi, and they raided like the Deccan region of South India, but they couldn't defeat Hindu resistance, and they didn't really have a permanent bureaucracy, and it was just like a thin veil of Islamic authority in the Hindu populated land, and they just really depended on goodwill to carry out their like administrating. And there was also a lot of internal struggles. Like they had this issue with like people being killed. Like 19 out of 35 sultans died, and that didn't help them a lot, to say the least. Yeah, but it helped establish a safe place for Islam in India. Okay, and then there's like two big kingdoms in southern India. There's and like in southern India, it was like still fighty, but it was like less fighting in basically every way. Like their conflicts were like less intense. They didn't last as long. They just weren't generally much of a big deal compared to the north. So the Chola kingdom was like deep in South India, and it was like it ruled the Coromandel coast from 850 to 1267 CE, and then at its peak it conquered like Ceylon and parts of Southeast Asia, and it dominated waters from the South China Sea to the Arabian Sea, and they got a lot of their financing from trade profit, and it wasn't tightly centralized, and the villages and like local institutions had a lot of autonomy as long as they followed orders and delivered taxes on time. And then the rulers were after trade profit instead of building a powerful state. Because the structure of it was loose, it was in decline by the 12th century, and then eventually the Chola officials get expelled from Ceylon, and then like revolts erupt in southern India, and by the 13th century they're just like greatly reduced in size, power, and they go back to like the status of a regional kingdom, but they don't completely collapse. And this is the kingdom of Vijayanagar, and it was based in like northern Deccan, and it was founded by two brothers. They're like Harihara and Bhuka, and they're sent by Delhi to represent the Sultan and to implement court policies in the south. And then they're like, we're just gonna do our own thing. So they renounce Islam in 1336. They go back to being Hindu, and they establish the independent empire of Vijayanagar, which is also called the City of Victory. But for some reason, it didn't cause a lot of tension between the Muslim and like the Hindus, and trade isn't really affected, and it's the dominant state in southern India from the mid 14th century until 1565, and it falls to the alliance of Muslim kingdoms. And that's it.